The self is silent being, and the only reality there is. Being utterly non-dual, without exception. Who is there who would stand apart from it in order to know it? Again, who would stand apart from it to be ignorant of it? The Maharshi says that the egoless state is our real state, the only real state that there is. His statement points out not only the nature of reality, the nature of the self, but also by implication, the means of realization. To know the self, your vision must be non-objective in nature. It is a matter of self-knowledge, not a knowledge of something else. It is a matter of knowledge of the Absolute. And for the Absolute to be absolute, it is one without a second. So its nature is declared to be unborn. And with no birth, there is no creation. That is to say, if there is no arising of I, which is the state of silent being, there can be no arising of this. The unborn means no creation. The egoless state is the state of that which is one without a second. The indivisible, undifferentiated reality. This birthless, deathless, spaceless, and timeless reality is all that you are. To realize it, why, knowing and being are the same. When you hear of the inquiry that the Maharshi has taught, who am I? You must understand it in its depths. If you understand it in its depths, the goal, apparently a goal, and the means are identical. And the one who practices and the one who realizes and what is realized are also all identical. Or we may say, there is none striving for liberation, none liberated. Just the liberation itself, just the one self. Here, I'll explain it in another way. The inquiry is a matter of asking yourself, who am I? This, anyone who is acquainted with the Maharshi's teachings, or Advaita Vedanta in general, would be, well, familiar with this. If you want lasting peace, if you want real freedom, if you want happiness that is unconditional, you must know yourself. You must know what is within. You must make an inquiry, who am I? For how else would you realize the knowledge of the self except by constantly inquiring as to who am I? The inquiry is within yourself. Now, if you attempt to approach this as if it were a method applied, whose understanding is that? This is the way of that inquiry. If we approach this thinking, what are we going to do? As Adi Shankar has pointed out, self-realization or liberation is a matter of knowledge, not a matter of action, which should be applied not only to physical action and the action of the senses, but mental activity as well. It is not a doing, but knowing, and knowing is intrinsic to consciousness, which is identical with being. You have to ask yourself, who am I? In the depths. If you try to chart this out as if it were an external method and another state to be attained, rather than awakening from this dreamlike illusion to the reality that ever is, then your pursuit will not be as fruitful as it would be if the inquiry is done with a non-objective vision. Who am I? That is the key. If you say to yourself, I know the self, or I do not know the self, I know the teaching, or I do not know the teaching, the I in that statement, or those statements, the knowledge of that I, there is the key. Who am I? If you have a doubt as to what is to be done with the mind, we must find out whose mind. For whom is the mind? Who is that I? If there is a doubt as to what is to be done with the senses, sensory experience, whose experience? For whom is it? Unless that question is answered interiorly first, there'll be no end to the doubts and no end to the temporary resolutions of the doubts, which in turn may cause more doubts. Put the question to yourself, who am I? And cease to misidentify with anything that is objective in character, which is anything with form, anything that's transient, anything that changes, anything but your essential existence. If you can perceive it, it is not you. If you can conceive it, it is not you. It is evident that the knower of thoughts cannot be conceived. Who is the knower? The knower of perceptions cannot be perceived. Who is the perceiver? If you dive deep into the perceiver, he ceases to be a perceiver. His nature is infinite consciousness, with nothing outside it, nothing inside it. If you dive deep into the knower, he ceases to be a knower, but is realized as knowledge itself. You see, the teaching is not in ideas. Silent being, the self itself, is the teaching. That is Brahman itself. That is the teaching. Everything else from the Vedas onward is auxiliary argument. However, having said that, we should not put them lightly aside, saying, oh, the I is all important and what has been written in the scriptures is not. It'd be better if we put the I aside and just let what was written in the scriptures remain. Because what is indicated therein is just that Brahman, just that absolute, vast, real self. The Maharshi has pointed out that all suffering, all bondage, comes about after the rise of I, the notion of or assumption of an ego entity. For whom is the bondage? Just for the ego. It cannot be for the real self. For whom does the ego arise? It cannot be for the real self. It must be for some other. Is there some other? Inquire, who am I? The other, the ego, being unreal, vanishes. What remains is, as he said, the only real state that there is. So when you destroy the ego, which generally, spiritually, all are agreed upon is the goal, When you destroy the ego, nothing real is being destroyed. Indeed, anything real is by nature indestructible. Only the unreal can be destroyed. But because it is unreal, this is why Shankara has said that there is no unreality and no destruction of unreality. You can't destroy something that's unreal, it's not there to begin with. But in practice, it seems to be there, so its destruction ought to be brought about. If we want to destroy the ego, the cause of all that's of the nature of futility and suffering in life, we have only to inquire as to what our nature is. Can there be two in you, the real supreme self, and an ego self, a limited self? When you hear instruction or read instruction about the self, is there still yourself? When you hear or think about God, is there someone else outside of God, other than God? In that case, inquire. Find out if there is a second, an I, an ego, an other. If you make this inquiry and are steadfast in it, you'll find that one reality, which is indivisible, which always is as it is. You will find the only real state. This much has been said, not just for the sake of being redundant to the silence, but once again to point out what the truth is and how to realize it. If at any point any of you have a question or you wish to relate your own experience, feel free to do so. Go ahead, please.
There is, in a waking state, there's bliss most of the time in my awareness. And it varies. Sometimes it appears in the foreground, and then the world appears to have an unreal quality to it. Sometimes it appears in the background, and there's more of an individual experiencer there. In some recent meditations I've had, there's been this ocean of bliss. And what I try to do in my practice is that and I remember I ask who is aware of the bliss or what is aware of the bliss. And that, because often I've found that when there is the presence of bliss, there's frequently an experiencer of that bliss. And by asking what is aware, then one comes back to the awareness, but the bliss doesn't go away. It's recognized that the awareness and the being, the bliss is the same. And in the meditation, the main difference was that the bliss was so constant, unchanging, and not having, you couldn't get too much of it. It was so natural, and there was no feeling of any difference between being and bliss. And last night, after eating dinner, I was eating ice cream, which is my habit since childhood. And there was bliss, bliss. But there was no pleasure from the taste or the eating or anything. And I understood that all the bliss is inside, or I am the bliss. And nothing could ever give that to me. Nothing. I mean, no. And so I asked myself, what is pleasure? What does that mean? What is enjoyment? Because if you are bliss, then some kind of experience is giving you yourself. That doesn't make any sense. And so that word pleasure or enjoyment is just meaningless to me. And if an old vasana comes up about seeking pleasure somewhere, or my happiness is there, then nearly immediately bliss arises. That it seems to arise, it's there. It's always there. But it's like, oh, I want that happiness. And there's a knowledge that the happiness is already here. You need not go anywhere for it. And there was one other meditation I wanted to ask about. And I was meditating, and the hand scratched the head. But I knew that I didn't do that. And then a thought came, and I knew that that was not my thought. And I felt that maybe there's some power working through this body, but if I'm not doing these things, then they're all predestined or out of my control, one or the other. And I pondered the significance of that. And I thought, and the mind started spinning, because if every thought is predestined and I'm trying to think about this, then who is the thinker? And what can I do if every action is predestined? That even the words that I'm talking to you now, this is all predestined to come out in some kind of response, and what can really be done inside of it. And so I got confused, and I know that confusion is not the answer, that it's beyond the confusion, beyond the mind. So please take it.
I see. You dream up the confusion, then you hand it to me to take care of it.
Of course.
Just because everybody's doing it doesn't mean it's right. All right. You say everything is predestined. What happens to the destiny when you're in deep dreamless sleep?
There's nothing there. There's no destiny.
There's no destiny, no idea of destiny, is there?
No.
If it cannot survive deep dreamless sleep, it's not real. What is real must be invariably so. So this destiny or predestination is an idea in the mind.
It does not even survive meditation.
Okay, it doesn't survive meditation. If it doesn't exist always, it is not the reality. That is the first thing to be comprehended.
So while it may be true on one level, it's not real.
It's expedient teaching in order to do what? To eliminate the false sense of egoity and the idea that you are the performer of action.
Okay.
But you will not find the Maharshi or the Vedanta saying at any point, your sadhana is predestined. Liberation is the state that always is, but it's not predestined. The only talk of destiny that way is for those who believe that they are the performers of action because they're misidentified with the body and take the world to be real. Consequently, their bliss is diminished. You'll notice that the more definition is given to the experiencer, the more the bliss diminishes, the less bliss there is. Happiness is directly proportionate to the elimination of the false sense of ego, including its attributes.
I understand that any idea of destiny is just another idea. And their understanding that there's not a doer, it's not a signpost to create confusion. You know, it's when you notice that there's no one scratching the head, that is what is there.
It is good to say that the body alone is busy with the affairs of the body. The senses play with their own objects. You are not the body and you are not the senses. So you're not the doer and you are not a sensing entity. It's imperative to see that. Furthermore, you should not regard those things as actually existing, because based upon what identity do you take something to be occurring?
As an individual.
As an individual and as a sensing entity. So if you say to yourself, I am not this, but do not thoroughly inquire, you'll still regard this as being real, which will foretell, not predestined, but foretell, your return to that misidentification again. So if you realize you're not the body, can the world be real? What does the Maharshi say in the reality in 40 verses? Has anyone ever seen the world without a body?
So predestiny is preconditioned upon the idea of being an individual.
Who would have the destiny?
If there wasn't an individual.
And who would have the free will? It all concerns an individual. Are you the individual? Where individuality vanishes, there, as Sri Bhagavan says, lies your greatest glory. That is, your bliss. Now, on the one hand, it is said that whenever happiness or bliss shines, it can only be the bliss of the real self, there not being two kinds of happiness or multiple kinds of happiness. It is one happiness, and then the degrees or its variations are actually just degrees of how veiling placed on top of it. In other words, misidentification. If there's much misidentification and attachment to things of the world, it is so veiled that it appears as suffering. But there's only one happiness or one bliss the whole time. On the other hand, to another questioner, the Maharshi said, if it comes and goes, it's not the real bliss. That wasn't to negate the prior teaching, but for someone whose aim is final self-realization. Then if it comes and goes, he says, that's not the real bliss, if it's dependent on circumstances or dependent on mode of mind. One should go more deeper.
So you recognize that the bliss that appears to come and go does not really come and go. That's your own being, and it's always there.
In which case it's you that come and go. The I.
I do not come and go.
The I that is true does not come and go. Being is bliss. Where being is, bliss is. Satchidananda, being, consciousness, bliss. It is one and the same thing.
The veil comes and goes.
And that veil starts with the idea of I. So, sadhana is the elimination of that I. Correct? Is there anything confusing about that?
I think I read that Mahasi says that everything is predestined, and it is true as long as ego lasts. But even after the ego dies, then the body still goes through the predestined karmic destiny, and so predestination, he says that that's true, and there is no free will.
Yes, the traditional teaching handed down for ages is of the three kinds of karma, prarabdha karma, which is commonly thought of as destiny, but it's really one's own doing from the past. That is like an arrow that has been shot. Once it leaves the bow, it's going to continue on its way to the target.
That's predestination.
That is thought of then as predestination. Really, it's one's own prarabdha karma. It's one's own doing. One is only getting the fruits of what was done before. However, the Maharshi said to say that the different types of karma all are destroyed, except that kind of karma. Why, he said he gave you an analogy. He said, it's like a man who had 3 wives. When he dies, are only 2 of them widows? Or aren't all 3 of them widows? With the demise of the ego, there is no kind of karma whatsoever. But as long as we are considering the body and manifestation, then what you're saying is so. The prarabdha karma continues until it is exhausted. But for the experience of the sage who has realized the truth, the experience of the Maharshi is such that there is no such thing.
Analogy of potter's wheel is given when the impetus is removed, it wheel spins for a while. And
That is the analogy given. But for one who has stepped off the wheel entirely, who has vanished from samsara, because of the knowledge of himself, there is no karma, no destiny.
destiny doesn't affect him, but that is a karmic destiny.
For whom?
Get cancer,
No, Maharshi did not have cancer. The onlookers
The
saw.
body did get cancer.
The onlookers who perceived the body as real saw the experience of cancer and assumed someone to be there. His experience was ajata, no creation, no life, no body, no cancer, no death. So it's a matter of whether we want to see what the actual interior experience is, or if we're looking for an explanation from the apparent perspective of the onlooker. For the latter, the teachings of a continuing wheel are quite accurate. For the interior experience, why, we have to cast aside the idea of the manifest. Make sense?
Yeah. But this concept of predestination is very important. And no free will is also very important.
If it is used for the purpose for which it is intended, which is the elimination of the idea of the importance of the ego, yes, it is very important.
That's why we end up doing things or end up in places where we didn't want to be in.
Yes, on the other hand, one is also fully responsible for one's own sadhana or spiritual practice. One's own happiness or suffering is not predestined. So everywhere self-effort is advised. But we should not be attached to phenomenal things because they're destined to happen as they're going to happen. Yet in the midst of that destiny, one should apply one's self-effort to go in the right direction of realization of truth. In the end, there's not free will or destiny. Neither of them exist.
That is what I like more.
If I understand it correctly, you're saying that to speak of destiny or predestiny is to create an object again. And you say don't create an object. One who speaks of destiny, it's as if you're creating something outside of you, the self. And when one ceases, or when there is a cessation of creating objects or throwing out objects, then destiny is like that flower vase becomes, are seen as just not destiny, not self, right? Is that one way
Yes,
of
but-
phrasing it?
Yes, but who is it that knows the flower vase?
I don't think there's no answer to that.
Well, without your senses, would there be the experience of a flower vase?
Oh, of course not. Actually, that was the other thing I was going to verbalize. Which is more correct, to say that is not me, or to say that is me, that flower vase?
What do you mean by me?
I understand. It would depend on the person's level of realization, whether it's considered, whether any object is considered to be the I or not the I. an object or the subject. Yes.
The present knowledge that you just elucidated, can it exist always?
I don't know.
When you're in deep dreamless sleep, do you have these ideas?
No. Clearly not.
The knowledge of reality transcends all three states of mind. It's not of the waking state, it's not of the dreaming state, not of the deep sleep state. This is why in some of the Upanishads it's referred to as the fourth. Not to stack another state on top of the first three, but to indicate it is beyond the three states and their content, even if the content be an absence. So the knowledge that you should know must be of a nature that is non-thought, non-conceptual. All the discussions about I and this, flower vase, no flower vase, etc., are only to point out that utterly transcendent knowledge. And if we abide in that, then we can see what the flower vase is or is not, or whatever.
And yet, when one comes out of deep sleep, one finds just speaking on an individual level, one finds that every morning one is more or less awakens to the same world as one went to sleep the night before.
Same thing
If that were
happens.
not the case, it would be a completely different universe. So,
The
is
same
there
thing
some-
happens in your dream state.
Yeah,
You're usually familiar with what goes on in a dream. It's not like you're a new arrival.
yeah, and yet there seems to be more, if we could say chaos or more less order within the dream state than within the so-called awakened state.
Which is why practice is generally recommended to be done in a waking state. However, it does not seem chaotic when you're in the dream.
True. I guess the question that is trying to arise is there some seed or latency within even the fourth state, from which all that springs?
Now, deep sleep is a causal state. It's a cause without an effect, while waking and dreaming have both cause and effect. Regard the subject as the cause, the object as the effect. In deep sleep, there's cause without effect. So it's called a causal state. Transcendent knowledge has neither cause nor effect. Nothing has happened. No one has been born. Dive within yourself, inquiring until you see this as self-evident truth.
Sometimes, or actually often as I meditate and practice, I notice still it's at a mental level. Sometimes it's not. And of course, one of the things that I wonder about real deeply is what makes the difference between the two as I approach it, because when I am doing the inquiry, and it's not at this mental state, it's obviously deeper, more filled with bliss, etc. Last night, my oldest, dearest friend is in for a few days from Czechoslovakia, and I went to visit him, and he was telling me all of his stories, and some more friends came over happily, and even though he's leaving in another couple of days, I had to leave because all of these stories were just, kind of too much, and it was funny. I really found what I wanted was silence, not stories. And I think kind of with that in mind, as I was driving back from Marin County, I was continuing the meditation, and somehow that meditation in this morning's meditation is much closer to, being the awareness rather than being any of the objects of awareness. And I know enough about the practice to recognize, and the experience of it is very different. You don't have to know about the practice. The experience of it is qualitatively different. And I sure wish I knew what to do where that were more a regular part of the experience and the meditation experience. Because it still seems, I have these experiences, I have them more frequently now, it seems. I don't know, actually, how they start. You say to retrace the steps, and I'm trying, if I could figure out what that were, I sure would. And I'm just wondering if you can continue trying to direct this poor rock-like mind in the right direction.
What is it that you want?
What I want is that this that I am now to be, kind of my whole natural experience, not to be contaminated by these thoughts of this body and person and world.
Well, then you've answered your own question, haven't you?
Yes.
Can you be the body?
Sometimes it seems not. Sometimes it's still those ideas persist.
Okay. You have those two states then.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
The one who has the two states, who is he? You're speaking about them now.
Yes.
Even now, are you the body?
And again, it's, of course, as we talk, the one who has the state is obviously what I tried to say before. This awareness that I am now has these two states and whatever imaginations that I may have.
But there's still only one that is aware.
Yes.
The multiplicity lies in what's objective,
Yes.
not in that which is non-objective.
Yes.
Make your vision non-objective.
It's, again,
Do you enter into multiplicity of states? Do you have two states? Or are you speaking of patterns of thought in the mind?
It's patterns of thought, clearly.
But that which knows the thoughts, all of the thoughts, since thought doesn't know itself, one thought can't know another.
Yes.
What is that? Interiorly put the question to yourself, what is
Yes.
that? Does it have thoughts?
No, it sees thoughts. The thoughts is quiet and silent, and the thoughts rise within it, it seems.
Then the thoughts think about themselves. Thoughts seem to rise within it. With their rise comes the rise of your body, the world, and all the other experience.
Yes.
When the thoughts cease, all that experience ceases.
But there is still this being and awareness, and it's brighter. It seems the fewer thoughts, the brighter is the being. No, that's not true. That's just again.
It may seem that way in practice.
Uh-huh.
With clearer discrimination, you see when you lend reality to thought, even if there's only one or two of them, there is obscuration.
Yes.
If you do not so superimpose the thought upon the reality or lend reality to thought,
Yes.
regardless of the number of thoughts, you're clear.
Mm-hmm. It is clear.
If mere reduction of thought would lead to liberation,
Mm-hmm.
then a mind in a tamasic or inertia-oriented state should be closer to the truth than one in a sattvic state.
Right. And that's clearly not the case.
Or again, just going to sleep should bring about realization.
Uh-huh.
Everyone has done that practice many
That's
times.
right.
Most of you have done that practice certainly within the last 24 hours. But it does not yield liberation from the imagined bondage.
Again, you have talked, one of the things that you've talked about very much is, through the years, is about knowledge in one stand. And, you know, I feel like I'm starting to understand that a little better. And that, on one hand, these experiences are the experiences, as I've talked about before, that seem like the experience of awareness.
What do you mean by awareness?
I don't mean sensory awareness. It's
That's
an
good.
internal
Because if you take
experience.
awareness to be sensory stuff,
Right.
you're just headed for death.
Again, here it's some kind of, I'm trying to find some different word for it. Sometimes
Okay.
I've called it knowledge,
Okay.
because it's much closer to knowledge.
Does it fluctuate
No, it doesn't.
in any state?
I am not aware of what it is like in deep sleep. I have watched it in the waking state and the dreaming state now for some time, and it's this knowledge that is being certainly seems to be.
But you do know you exist in deep sleep.
After deep sleep, I knew I existed.
No, after deep sleep, you have the thought you existed. You have
Okay,
that cognition.
Right. Yes, yes, yes.
But if you did not know it, you would not be able to speak about it later.
Yes.
How did you know it?
Again, here, since I'm speaking of it now, I can only speak of it with the best indirect knowledge.
Your existence, without regard to states of mind. You know that you are, you exist.
Yes.
How do you know that? Before you think about it.
Again, I know it by knowing.
Okay.
And it's that knowing it by knowing is that perhaps is just an idea.
Regard the knowledge of your existence as true knowledge, for it doesn't depend on anything.
Yes.
Everything else regard as imagination. Apply that in your inquiry. Everything else is dependent or indirect knowledge,
Yes.
which is a pleasant way of speaking of hallucination or imagination, which is what all this illusion is.
Yes.
Self-existent or non-dependent knowledge is alone true knowledge. It is identical with consciousness. So Prajnana Brahman, Brahman is supreme knowledge, usually translated as consciousness is Brahman. The knowledge itself is Brahman. You yourself are the knowledge. If you know about it, if it's that kind of knowledge, it's removed from you,
Yes.
as if it were some kind of activity or function. That's not real.
Again, if I know about it, I also understand a little differently what you said before about conditioned and kind of unconditioned.
Okay.
And if I know about it, it already is conditioned. And if it's conditioned, it's this indirect.
What you know about comes and goes, doesn't it?
Yes, yes,
So it's conditioned both
Yes.
by time and by limitation.
yes.
What you are doesn't cease.
It's not.
There's never a time when you are not. There's never a time when you cease to be. But that's not a body.
Yes,
That's not the mental attention, which obviously darts and stays and vanishes altogether. What is not the body, not of the senses, not of the prana or animating life energy, it's not alive, not the mind, and not individualized, that is the real knowledge. The point of the inquiry is to know yourself as that, to identify yourself clearly as that, and not to mistake yourself to be anything else. Again, it cannot be charted out. You want to know what to do. It is a natural question. If we're in bondage, we want to know what to do for liberation. If we're in ignorance, we want to know what to do to attain final knowledge. But the way is one of knowledge, self-knowledge. It's jnana at the end, knowledge, jnana in the means, knowledge. So something cannot be charted out in that respect. That's why the Upanishad says it's like the tracks of the birds in the empty sky. Nevertheless, there's incredible precision to it, but the precision is all due to a non-objective vision. As long as there's oscillating states, find out who sees those states. Do not regard your identity as that which changes. Don't regard reality as that which changes. If you clarify identity but leave the sense of reality dangling behind in the context of the old tendencies, your freedom won't be complete because it'll be based upon certain suppositions, certain misidentification. That was mentioned earlier. Make your inquiry thorough. Do not treat your meditation as if it were an objective thing that you could report on later or to yourself.
Yes.
Meditation is all about the meditator. Again and again, who is he? Stay with it. Keep your mind focused upon it. Persevere with it. Make your inquiry continuous. It can be if it's off the mental level. Is it clear for you how to proceed?
Yeah, I find that self-inquiry requires too much thinking compared to other methods of just rejection of thought or something.
How are you going about the practice?
What?
How are you going about the practice?
Or just make not that neti or one of those methods, requires far less thoughts compared to questioning who is thinking, it requires far more effort.
The inquiry is not thinking, who am I? We use the phrase, who am I, just to indicate the kind of introspection that is to be practiced. The Maharshi says you put the question to yourself once. Follow the significance inward. If one is thinking, who am I, who am I, who am I, or just thinking about things, it might be an aid to practice, but it's not the actual inquiry. Just as if one has heard the instruction, received instruction, neti, neti, not this, not this. It is not meant that we go on thinking the words, neti, neti, or not this, not this. It's indicative of the orientation of the mind, truly inward. Nevertheless, each one will approach in a way that it seems most beneficial. It's not important whether it's easy or hard. It's only important that it yields the fruit that one is desiring. If the fruit or result is self-knowledge, it should yield that. Whether it's easy or hard, it's of no significance. The difficulty will only, in the end, be seen to be apparent and not real.
Is it okay to practice both of them?
It is all right to practice anything that brings about a subsidence or dissolution of the ego, be it of the nature of knowledge, devotion, or otherwise.
The last point I want to make on predestination is, the reason is that predestination is there because the phenomenal world is evolving. That's the reason why this predestination idea is there.
It is destined to be evolving?
It is evolving. The phenomenal universe is evolving.
All right, but it's destined to do that evolving.
Yeah, it is cause and effect, under strict law of cause and effect.
Who has brought about this destiny?
I don't think we know that.
No, it is beyond our thought, beyond human conception.
Yeah.
Parameshwara, the Supreme Lord, Lord of the universe, Lord even beyond the universe when the universe is
So
dissolved.
some call it Ishvara.
Yes, Ishvara, Parameshwara,
Same thing.
same thing. The nature of that Parameshwara is ultimately that of Brahman, the unspeakable absolute. Given that as the fact, the ego does not count. And since the Supreme Lord cannot possibly bring forth anything other than the same that would be of a different nature, then not only does the ego not count, the ego does not exist. Then all this, in whatever way it may appear, it is all Brahman. But since Brahman is beyond any kind of modification, unalterable in its nature, infinite in extent, eternal, then Brahman alone is. There's no such thing as all. If there's all is Brahman. But if in Brahman, there's no all.
So a clear and thorough and deep knowledge of the teaching is predominantly important, because otherwise the practice cannot reach the goal if it is based on old notions of one. It's all based on the teaching only. That is liberating.
Yes, that's why listening, reflecting, and deep meditation, Shravana, Manana, Nidhyasana, are advised. They result in samadhi, state of absorption, which should be further realized as the natural state. To have a comprehension of the teaching is very useful and helpful for spiritual practice. Again, one has to be practicing in order to comprehend the teaching. They go hand in hand. The further one proceeds, the simpler the teaching is. Ultimately, it resolves itself into something that is not even a thought. So supremely simple is it? From another angle of vision, doing one's best to have a good comprehension of these teachings passed down since the most ancient times is extremely useful. Otherwise, one's following the doctrines of one's own mind. I hope they're good doctrines. One follows the tradition. It's either the tradition of one's own mind or the tradition of ancient knowledge, but one is going to follow tradition.
So the teaching itself already is the truth. And the practice shows something.
Yes.
That is an easy line.
It appears as expedient means and manner and different manners of explanation. But the teaching itself is ultimately the truth. And the truth alone is able to realize itself. And the power in one's practice to liberate is actually just the shining of the truth, since the ego does not exist.
Thank you. That's the experience.
When you were speaking about existence, it felt like I was erased out of the picture and only existence was there. The ego wasn't there, and it felt very blissful. See that's the direction in which we need to practice is to meditate on that reality, existence, consciousness, and to, in that way, remove myself out of the picture and have that experience.
Yes, if what you regard as yourself is removed, that which is really yourself shines. So by any means possible, remove that false sense of I and its concomitant my.
परमेवाक्षरं प्रतिपद्यते सयोः वै तच्चायम् अशरीरम् अलोकितं शुभ्रम् अक्षरं वेदयते यस्तु सौम्य स सर्वज्ञः सर्वो भवति तदेष श्लोकः.
He who realizes that shadowless, bodiless, colorless, pure, immutable, attains the supreme immutable itself. O amiable one, he again who realizes becomes omniscient and all. Illustrative of this, there occurs this verse.
विज्ञानात्मा सह दैवैश्च सर्वैः प्राणाभूतानि सम्प्रतिष्ठन्ति यत्र तदक्षरं वदेयते यस्तु सौम्य स सर्वज्ञः सर्वमेवाविवेशेति.
O amiable one, he becomes all-knowing and enters into all who knows that immutable wherein merges the cognizing self, the Purusha who is naturally a knower, as also do the organs and the elements together with all the deities.
स प्राणम् असृज प्राणात् छद्रं खं वायु ज्योतिः आपः पृथिवी इन्द्रियं मनः अन्नम् अन्नात् वीर्यं तपो मन्त्राः कर्म लोका लोकेषु च नाम च.
He created prana. From prana, he created faith, space, air, fire, water, earth, organs, mind, food. From food, he created vigor, self-control, mantras, rites, worlds, and name in the worlds.
स यथेमा नद्यः स्यन्दमानाः समुद्राणाः समुद्रं प्राप्यास्तं गच्छन्ति भिद्येते तासं नामरूपे समुद्रमित्येवं प्रोच्यते. एवमेवास्य परिदृष्टुरिमा षोडशकलाः पुरुषायानाः पुरुषं प्राप्यस्तं गच्छन्ति भिद्येते चासं नामरूपे पुरुष इत्येवं प्रोच्यते. स एषो कलो मृतो भवति तदेष श्लोकः.
The illustration is this. Just as these flowing rivers that have the sea as their goal get absorbed after reaching the sea, and their names and forms are destroyed, and they are called merely the sea, so also these 16 parts, that is, constituents, of the all-seeing Purusha, that have Purusha as their goal, disappear on reaching Purusha, when their names and forms are destroyed and they are simply called Purusha. Such a man of realization becomes free from the parts and is immortal. On this point, there occurs this verse.
Ara ivarathanabo kala yasmin pratishtitaha tam vedyam purusham veda yathama vo mrityuhu parivyatha iti.
You should know that Purusha, who is worthy to be known and in whom are transfixed the parts, like spokes in the nave of a chariot wheel, so that death may not afflict you anywhere.
तान् होवा चैतावदेहम् एतत् परं ब्रह्म वेद नातः परम् अस्ति इति.
To them he said, I know the supreme Brahman thus far only. Beyond this there is nothing.
Te tam archayantastam hinaha pita yosmakam vidyayaha param param tarayasiti namaha paramarshibhyo namaha paramarshibhyaha.
While worshipping him, they said, You indeed are our Father, who have ferried us across Nescience to the other shore. Salutations to the great seers. Salutations to the great seers.
Om Ishavasya sarvam yatyinchit jagatyam jagade tena tyaktena bunjita matridakasya siddhanam.
Om, all this whatsoever moves on the earth should be covered by the Lord. Protect yourself through that detachment. Do not covet anybody's wealth, or do not covet for whose is wealth.
Aneke jadekam manasi javi yonena deva aapnuvan purvamashat tadhavato anyanatye vittishtasmin napoma atarishva dadati.
It is unmoving, one, and faster than the mind. The senses could not overtake it, since it ran ahead. Remaining stationary, it outruns all other runners. It being there, Mata Rishva allots or supports all activities.
Jade jadit tanne jadit tadore tadva antike tadantarasya sarvasya tadusarvasya asya bhakyataha.
That moves, that does not move, that is far off, that is very near, that is inside all, and that is outside all.
Yastu sarvāni bhūtānyātmaņevanupashyati sarvabhūteshu chātmanam tado na vijugupsate.
He who sees all beings in the very self, and the self in all beings, feels no hatred by virtue of that realization.
Yasmin sarvāni bhūtānyātmaiva bhūtvijanataha tatra ko moha kashoka evatvananupashyataha.
When to the man of realization all beings become the very self, then what delusion and what sorrow can there be for that seer of oneness? Or in the self of the man of realization, in which all beings become the self, what delusion and what sorrow can remain for that seer of oneness?
สัพพัญจกาชุดนมักกายมะพระนมัสนาบิดกัมชุดธรรมภาปะวิตตัมกะเวทมณีชีปริโภสยัมโภยาอาดาดัจจโตอัฏฐานเวรตาชาชวติเยหะสมาอาเยหะ
He is all pervasive, pure, bodiless, without wounds, without sinews, taintless, untouched by sin, omniscient, ruler of mind, transcendent and self-existent. He has duly allotted the respective duties to the eternal years, that is, to the eternal Creator, called by that name.